apologize, it is now 4:02. Let's call the regular Board in Education and Business Committee meeting to order for Tuesday, March 27th. And I understand that Trustee Croft is not able to join us today. We respectfully acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional and ancestral lands of the Coast Salish people, where we live, learn, and play. We have one addition to the agenda, that is 6B, and it's an announcement by our chairperson, Mill Bay Elementary. Any other additions or changes to the agenda? Moved by Trustee Spilsbury, second by Trustee Smith. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. The minutes of February 27th, 2018, Board of Education and Business.
So moved.
Trustee Smith, Trustee Warren, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. No action list today. No petitions and delegations. Board performance review, 6A. Who's leading this? Chairperson.
Well, I can just begin by saying that the performance review is attached to the agenda, and at the bottom of the summary, there are 3 areas that the board needs to continue to focus on. Strategic priorities plan, trustee pro-D, and succession planning. And
After looking at these, I think they should be separated. Just because I think they, especially the last one, it needs to be on its own. So I don't know how we do that, but I believe that if we're looking at succession planning and RPRO-D, those are 2 completely different things. I don't think they should be. They need time, a different time frame.
Trustee Spilsbury.
yes, so coming back, and I've just thought about this and wondered if our board would like to leave the strategic priorities plan in place that we have designed and we're still working on, and have it just be picked up by the next board in terms of any revisions and so on, because we're getting close to that happening. We're getting close to the school year, and it would seem to me more appropriate to put that into the next board's planning. So that would be a recommendation for the strategic priorities. Trustee Pro-D, I'm wondering.
Can you just do that one first? Though?
Sure.
So when you say give it to the next board as is, or are we planning in August or September saying a review of it, here we're at, here's where we got to, go forth and
Multiply.
build on it? Or?
My only feeling is that we have just completed that review, and that September you will all be campaigning, so you won't have time to devote to the priorities plan. So I think we're close enough to the end of the school year to just say we have done, our planning over the last 2 to 3 years. We have reviewed it 2 years in a row, so it's been adjusted as we go, and I think at this point the strategic priorities plan still has direction in it that will be ongoing forever. For example, in the curriculum area, to implement the new curriculum, to design personalized learning, to activate student voice. All those things are ongoing for a long time. The other areas where we had specific plans, like review of rentals, we did that. We've moved on from there. I think it's in a good position now that we can say we have completed and are still working on sections to the point where any further adjustments could wait for a few months before the new board.
So are you referring this to the new board for review and revision?
My only thing on that would be is if we have new folks sitting around the table, it'd be nice if there was a document that went with the strategic plan saying what was completed. Just so that it's, because we know we've done rental review, we know what we've done, it would just be nice in the trustee orientation and stuff, if there was a supporting document saying these have been completed, so they have some guidance to move forward on what that may look like in the future. I know we had talked about it, and I think we had done something, but I'm not sure, I don't know where it went from there. So if there was just some kind of supporting document, so whoever's new at the table just has some reference to say, okay, that's done, that's done, that's done, so when they go to update, maybe they can remove some of those things, so we'll have that document showing it's done. I don't even know.
So are we delegating that to the superintendent, or are we doing that?
We sorry.
Do
We've actually already kind of done that though. I mean, when we went through, we said these are the things we've done, and we have a list somewhere that will have that on it, because when we did our review, we had, this is what we've done, this is what we're still working on, and these are the checked off items, right? So I think we've got that already someplace.
So perhaps if we have at our next bed meeting, could we dig out that list that we did and make sure it is accurate and complete, and then we can refer the whole darn thing on or revise it as necessary. Okay, everybody okay with that?
Okay.
Next bed meeting. Trustee Pro D, we have no policy, we have no plan.
That's correct. But we need to make any adjustments on that at our policy review, which is in June, and our budget prior to that. So, and for us, I'm not sure that we want to make a plan for like September for us. I think that too needs to wait for the new board. But there are aspects that we need to put in place, like in our policy and in our budget.
But why, if we have a problem or a lack of how we do business in terms of no policy, why wouldn't we fix it? They can revise it if they don't like it. But to leave it blank, because they'll have theoretically no money to work with unless we put something in the budget this year.
Oh, yeah, I'm saying yes to the budget and yes to the policy.
Oh.
As we move forward, to have a policy in place and to have a budget in place, but not to make a plan for us. That's what I'm saying.
Well, there would be a plan for
Trustees.
September,
Yes,
and there isn't too many professional development activities in September prior to election. Okay, so who is going to be assigned to look at other examples of that Pro D policy and bring it back to the table?
I thought we had Leroy Sloan working on that.
Awesome. So we've done that.
I think so.
Is there confirmation there?
Yeah. I'm looking at
Well, he's got those eyes today.
Let's call this tired.
I don't know if the policy specifies an allotment for Pro D at this point though, so, but that is information that I have collected from BCSTA. Because we do a survey annually what Pro D is put aside for trustee use, so I may have some information on that, but I haven't done anything with it. So I don't think it's specified in the current policy that Leroy has worked, that Mr. Sloan has worked on, that trustees will have an additional Pro D beyond attending, the regular BCSTA activities. I'll have to check.
Trustee Smith.
Gordon Como had given us a rough amount. He said $1,500 a year per trustee, they could roll it over, save it up, yada, yada, yada. And I thought that was something we were gonna look at, but he also said make sure that you adjust it at budget time, make sure that Pro D budget's in place, so I think that's something that trustee DeGroot had already brought up too, so I think that's all gonna be happening soon anyway.
Yeah, it's something we can, we have a bit of a budget presentation tonight, but it's not inclusive of all the additional options that the board will have to consider, so we'll add this to that. So that becomes part of the budget process. And we'll have to make sure the policy aligns to that.
Okay, last one, succession plan.
Succession planning, as we only have one employee, it seems that, we should develop a plan. And I'm wondering if the board would be interested in, the superintendent and the chair developing a draft plan and coming to the closed board meeting with that plan.
Have you talked to the superintendent over that? That's a great plan. Trustee Thorne.
I think we've already agreed that that's what we wanted to do. Somewhere in my little head, I hear those words, and we've talked about this before.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Okay, do you need a resolution, or are you just gonna do it? Need a resolution?
Either way.
Just do
Either
it.
way.
Just do it. Okay,
We'll just get her done.
Oh, I really think we need a motion.
You want a motion?
It's just for a draft, right?
Yeah, but it's being a draft to close the
Trustee DeGroot has a motion.
voting. That the superintendent and the chair of the board bring a draft succession planning program to the board, closed board meeting. Sorry, that's as loud as I'm going to get. That the superintendent and the board chair bring a draft succession planning program to the closed board meeting. The next one.
seconded by Trustee Smith. Any discussion on that?
You're such a bully today.
All those in favor?
Yeah.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item number B is a new item, midday school.
Yes, I am very excited to announce and provide a news release, which is primarily put together by our communication specialist. That announces that Mill Bay Elementary will be open, and that it will be the site for a new primary program at this point for a nature directed curriculum. So we were successful, the staff was successful in getting permission from the ministry to use our restricted capital funds to support the renovation that will be needed. And it's hoped that it will start ASAP and be ready for September. The other aspect that's important is to know that the posting for a new principal will be going out today or tomorrow, shortly, to design the program with input from lots of community members probably who are interested in a nature school, an agriculturally related program, as well as other staff. There's a strong connection to some of the work that's already being done in the community, like the land-based program. So I would anticipate that it will be a huge success.
Congratulations. Any questions of our chairperson?
Not a question, but a suggestion. I know that in Shawnigan, some of the school kids have been going to a site where there is a horticultural.
Is that Echo Village?
No. This is done by Tafadzwa. I can't say his last name, but he and his wife have been bringing students there to show them how to grow things. Is that kind of what we're trying here?
I'm sure there'll be lots of gardening programs involved in it. Because that's part of the nature, getting out, viewing the world and looking at the connections to our curriculum through that medium. So I'm pretty certain that'll be part of it. Perhaps the superintendent would like to explain more about the nature program.
Thank you. Madam Trustee, Yeah, I mean, certainly one of the key things to do is to hire a principal to begin really the nuts and bolts designing of the program. But as we look at other nature-based programs around the province that are very, very successful, they incorporate a wide variety of outside the walls and in the outdoors kinds of activities. They would include such things as gardening and so on, but also making use of the valley that we have. We are in an amazing place in this province, and making use of all the assets that the valley has, as the land-based program with senior students has done. We'll be recreating that with younger students. As we've looked at programs, often nature-based kindergarten programs that have been hugely successful, one of the downsides of kindergarten programs is that they often end at kindergarten and then they go back in the box for grade 1. So the intent here is to build a program that ladders up through the years, that students can stay in that kind of, that choose that kind of a program can stay in that kind of a milieu through much more of their school career than just simply kindergarten and then back into a regular classroom. But this is a design as we go kind of a piece. We want to get the folks in place, connect with the providers of many of those kinds of services and experiences out in the community and see what they have to say and learn from the experiences of our secondary programs at Mill Bay, at Kelsey and at Cal High, and bring all that together into an offering for our younger kids.
How do you see the messaging getting out to the families in the South Cowichan area, or actually the Central Cowichan area? Because you can come from Duncan to go to the school.
Absolutely. We'd be using, luckily we have a communications person, so we'd be using Katie. I think it's going out and talking with PACS, it's going out and meeting with parents, it's putting that information out to them and being able to describe as accurately as possible what that experience is like and having them enroll their students in that program. So I think it's just getting the word out.
So I imagine you want that principal on the ground as soon as possible.
Very quickly. Very quickly. So we would hope to have a posting out this week. Might be optimistic, but if not in the next 2 days, because this week is short, as I keep trying to remember. Early next week, but hopefully this week.
Trustee Smith.
How is enrollment gonna happen for that school? I was pondering this while sitting in a cold, gross looking building one day, thinking, how's that gonna work? Cause the school is currently still closed because we still need to renovate it.
Mhm.
We don't currently have staff, but we're announcing a program. So what is that gonna look like?
We'd be sort of getting parents wanting to register their children at the school, whether it's kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, or grade 3. If that's what we decide are our boundaries, kindergarten to grade 3.
No, when?
When? In the next month and a half.
That's it.
Yep. Okay. We need some of that information for budget, staffing allocations, and thinking through those pieces. But as soon as we can, but also balancing that with people need time to understand what it is and to make decisions and choices and ask questions and those kinds of things.
I think the sooner it's better from a staffing perspective, because the idea is that there may be students that are in other schools which will choose this program that may currently be enrolled in another school, so we don't want to be staffing another school for kids that aren't there and that show up at the Mill Bay. So we do have quite a short timeline to get that information.
Thank you very much. Okay, business and operations, Mr. Sanquist, 2018-2019 annual budget.
Yeah, we have a PowerPoint. I go to the front of the room and I have my pointer and
Nice.
we'll walk through it.
Wow, big printing, that's nice.
So don't get your hopes up.
Well,
We saw it this morning.
it's gonna get complicated.
It's gonna be complicated, but yeah,
over there. It's if the TV went the other way, the spreadsheets would flow a little bit better for this presentation. But this is about the 2018-2019 annual budget. This is the start of our process. Our funding has been received. We've looked at our cost pressures and savings and rolled our budget over from the prior year, this year, and now have a position to show you where we're starting. So we can move to the next slide. We always start out by sort of showing the enrollment, where we've been, where we are now, where we anticipate we will be. So here is about a 60 FTE increase between this year and next year. And so that increase in enrollment generates additional funding along with it. So we can move to the next slide. So the budget is underway. Right now we are looking at budgeting, as we do in all years, for our operating, special purpose, and capital funds. The operating grant was announced over spring break. It took us some time when we got back to analyze it and see really what it meant. It doesn't have any targets other than Aboriginal education, which is $1.8 million. Separately, we'll be budgeting for special purpose and capital funds. Most of our budget work focuses on the operating fund. That's the biggest component. Special purpose funds are restricted, so usually there's some rules around how the board can spend them. A big piece is the classroom enhancement fund is a little bit different this year than it has been in prior years, or prior year, this year. So far the ministry has only announced about 80% of the prior year's amount, so they've only made a commitment for about $285 million versus the $340 that went into teachers for the prior year. So in our case, I'll get to that again, we have another slide a little bit later on classroom enhancement fund. So what's interesting is that we can't budget for a deficit within that fund, so we actually will have to budget within the allotment that they've given us, even though we know our expenditures will be a lot higher, and apply for those funds through what's called stage 2, and later on through stage 3 funding. They're also not giving us any overhead funding up front. So this year in our overhead, we have things such as education assistance, sick leave for those teachers. We have some custodial time, we have some clerical time, and we have some Pro-D for classrooms with students with designations in them. So there's no commitment yet for those funds, although there will be a process to apply for those extra pressures. So we need to be thinking about the risk of not knowing how much they're going to be supporting when we do our budget around that area. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Mr. Sanquist, is that a change from past practice?
Well, it's only been practiced for 1 year, so it is. Last year, up front, the board received an allotment of $8.8 million and didn't really even require it all. This year, it's less, so the ministry are maybe hopeful that the pressures won't be as high next year. I'm not sure why, it's only about 80% of the prior year amount, but that's where they're starting. So we can move to the next slide. So overall, the block funding for education is up from $5.039 billion to $5.17 billion. And that is mainly because of increases for labor settlement. So teachers and support staff all have wage increases that are effective on July 1st and then again on May 1st, as well as economic stability dividend. And they're also ensuring that all new students are funded appropriately. So what we see is we see a change in the basic allocation from 7,301 to 7,423. Change of $122. Special needs, level 1, 2, and 3 have all gone up a bit, as has English learning, Aboriginal education, and adult education. So there's some additional funds into the formula for this year. We can move to the next slide. This is one that's going to be hard to see from your viewpoint. So, but hopefully we should have actually had a handout for you for this particular one. But what it's going to show you, if you could read it, is that overall, the September enrollment, based on those 60 FTE that I said we're up, is going to generate about 1.4 million. That figure, for those that can't see, is about 1.4 million. It's 1.395. Special needs, there's some additional students in here, an additional 5 level 1s, down 5 level 2, up 11 level 3s, up 15 English language learner. We have a drop of about 26 in Aboriginal education right now, and adult education up 6.5. So that generates about $400,000. One item that we need to look into a little bit further is our unique geographic factors. So that's factors that are unique to your district: heating, cooling, distance from Vancouver, schools across water, small schools. It's up $169,000. So I haven't done the work to figure out why that's up, but that's a positive for the district because that's funding that's not enrollment based. So hopefully that stays with the district moving forward. So overall, that grant is up by $2.3 million over the $2.337870 over the funding that was announced last December. So what we don't have yet is the update from February, which we know is going to be a little bit higher for this year, and we don't have our May count in yet. But based on what we have in the budget that the board adopted for the amended budget, we're up by almost $2.4 million in revenue. There's costs that come with that because, of course, we'll get to that in the next part here. So the next slide, please. So how is the district funded? Again, 90% of it comes through the provincial grant, very significant portion, 5.9% for local education agreements. So that's about 96% of the funding coming from the students that live within the valley. 3.58% coming in from our international students. So when you combine those, you're almost at 99. Well, you are at 99% because we'll basically get a little bit out of our investment revenue, leases, and other revenues. So just to really show how student-driven we are. We don't have a lot of ways to generate money. One of the ways we do it is through the international student program, but there isn't a lot of other capacity for the board to generate operating funds. Pretty reliant on the Ministry of Education. Next slide. So where do we spend the money? Again, these are all before we do any balancing adjustments, so we'll get to that other position. Wages and benefits is, as you know, roughly about 90% of the budget. That's a pretty consistent amount. Reduction of unfunded employee future benefits, we put in another $50,000. We're one of 4 school districts, so 60 that still have a balance there. So, but we're getting close. We're probably 2 years out from, if we continue that plan of $50,000 a year, getting rid of that number. That'll be a celebration. We have utilities at about 1.65%. Little you can do there as a balancing item. We've had an energy manager who's done a lot of work to get that figure under control. You can't really turn off the heat to the schools as a way to balance your budget. So really it's, you get supplies at 3.17%, insurance is pretty fixed, services, a lot of that relates to the tuition for the dual credit students. That's a big piece of the services. So that has to be there in order to get the revenue in for the students that are taking those courses. So there's not a lot of flex in there either. So, to the next slide. So when looking at instruction, I think I'm going to put the same slide in twice. So we may see that slide again. I think I may have inserted it in the wrong spot. So the other slide here is instruction, 58%, special education, about 20.72% of our overall instruction budget, but this is basically how we spend the money that we spend on instruction. I think the other slide that was supposed to be there was to show you the difference between instruction, administration, transportation, and operations and maintenance, and roughly the figures are 82% instruction, just over 3% is into admin, which is the board and this office. About 11.5% is the operations and maintenance, and roughly 3% is transportation. So the next slide. Yeah, we did it already. So I put the wrong one in twice. So keep moving on. So here's the reconciled budget position for 2018-2019. I've showed you that the funding has changed. It's gone up by almost $2.4 million. Hopefully these figures are big enough to see from back there. So if it's a positive number, that means that something's being added. If it's a negative, that's a cost pressure. So we dropped a little bit in other provincial grants, and why that dropped was the return of admin savings, which the board received a grant for. It's just now, which crossed out a negative in the actual grant announcement. It's just been eliminated altogether. So now there is no elimination for admin savings and return of those funds. That's about $348,000 of that. The other piece is the board this year received a grant to pay for the additional incremental cost of bringing QP and steelworkers onto a new harmonized benefit plan. So that's all now just part of the formula. So it's really a net figure of what the funding is that's being received this year. Tuition, we had a cohort for the education assistants that we've now taken out. There may be another one next year, but we don't know that at this time. But there was tuition that we charged for those students that weren't ours, that were part of that program. Small adjustments in other. Surplus used to balance the budget. We used $1.3 million to balance this year's budget that we're in. So we're starting with a blank slate. We're taking that out, although we will have surplus this year as well to contribute in after. Some costs, teacher wage increments. Lots of new hires, they move up the grid. As you know, with the classroom enhancement fund, we brought in a lot of new teachers. The figure's a little bit higher, so I think we've now have a little bit of a younger workforce after that new hiring phase. That would normally be in the 300 range, but next year we expect the increments to be about $421,000. Teacher and support staff wage increases, they've been announced, I mentioned that before, 0.5% at July 1st, 1% at May 1st, and that amounts to almost $600,000. There's a kind of a in and out here with the drop of the MSP premiums to 50% of the previous year's premium. The board has a savings, although you also have a pressure for increased costs related to teacher benefit plans of about $250,000, but those two net to a gain of about $121,000. So you actually have some savings there on overall benefits. You lose on 1.95% payroll tax. Now there's lots of lobbying happening provincially, and I don't know that that is completely settled yet provincially. I know that BCSTA are having conversations with the Ministry of Education as our superintendents, as our secretary treasurers, hope that that tax will come off the school system. But right now it's part of how we're going to pay for MSP premiums moving forward. So we have budgeted for it at this time, because we know that it exists at this time, but I don't think it's completely done deal yet. Election costs of $100,000. That's what we put in the budget originally. It's sounding like it may be even a little bit more than that. Some of the cost sharing conversations that we've had are it's going to get a little more expensive this year than prior years, so we may need to make a little bit more of an adjustment there. We took out the one-time benefits, one-time demographics and policy consultants, and we had some other miscellaneous adjustments. So right now we start out with a shortfall of just over $1 million. Now, of course, we haven't brought any surplus in, so just taking out that surplus is mainly the reason why we have a shortfall. So move to the next slide. So I really want to emphasize that position doesn't bring in any surplus yet, and I'll be bringing a surplus projection to the board at next week's meeting. And I know in the projections that we've been bringing you, there is still surplus above and beyond the 1% that the board has committed through their policy to maintain as a contingency. So we'll get a better handle on what that figure is, or what might be possible for the board to bring into this budget to balance. Some items that we haven't considered yet are continuing to transition the exempt and principal, vice principal groups onto a new regional salary model. So this year's budget has money for that. We haven't spent it yet, and that will be part of next year's surplus if approval isn't given before June, which could then be put into the next year's budget as well to help offset that. So there already is a line item that could kind of just go forward with the money that was set aside from last year. Costs associated with operating Mill Bay Elementary as a school. So we'll need to budget for some admin time, as well as some clerical, some custodial time. It's a new facility that will have some costs associated with it. Reconciliation, so that was an item that we had talked about in an earlier presentation, whether there's resources that the board wishes to allocate there. Trustee compensation, trustee Pro-D, as we just discussed, another item which we'll hopefully be reviewing. Early years supports, tech plan funding increase, there's some requests for additional funding for the technology plan, communication plan funding increase. These are things we brought forward in the previous February meeting. Tradesperson transfer from capital to operating, vehicle replacement program, international program has a couple of staffing requests and some support for the Learning Commons model. So we'll bring some costing on these items as options for the board as we get into the next phase of the budget. But just want to be aware that where we are now is mainly a rollover of existing level of service without the add-ons. So we're at more than $1 million short with the existing level of service roll from this year to next year. Okay, so how will the classroom enhancement fund be allocated for 2018-2019? So here's where I wanted to highlight for you that the amount for teachers that's being committed right now is $5.5 million. This year it was $6.8 million. So already $1.3 million less than what was committed for this year as part of the ministry's first announcement. So they're announcing in 3 stages, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. So we're going to have to prove to them that we need the difference for stage 2. So that'll be part of an application. So there's a little bit of risk there when you're budgeting.
So why?
Okay, that's enough.
Eloquent answer.
Yeah, I don't have an answer there. They did send out a memo on it. And it's just written that the government has committed $284 million to phase one. Like that's what's been committed to date. The overhead costs as well have not been announced. So at this point, there isn't a commitment to overhead. Although it's expected that there'll be a process for applying for overhead. But we'll need, it's a risk factor within this budget that we need to be concerned, we need to be thinking about. How do we budget for something? How do we staff on something when we don't necessarily have the money secured for it yet, but yet we have to because it's part of the memorandum of agreement, there's no choice but to comply. So, yeah. What about further classroom space? So in 2017-2018, the board received we have this year, we received $1.3 million to get everything lined up for restoration of the collective agreement language. That ends this year. So any future requirements to add space to the school district have to come out of district funds or through other applications to the ministry. So there's no more Bill 28 capital money beyond this year. So when we talked about the requirements that you may need to do, reinstate classrooms currently leased to third parties, changing catchment areas, adjusting grade configurations and programming, reopening closed facilities. So here's where I wanted to make a note of one of the board's responses was to reopen Mill Bay Elementary to deal with the space pressures in the south zone. Certainly there was no additional space to be repurposed. Changing catchment areas in a full zone doesn't do anything to help with the capacity issues. Adjusting grade configurations when Francis Kelsey is already nearing capacity as well isn't really an option, which is why the board has chosen the option of reopening the closed school in order to deal with the pressures in the area that are coming through composition and enrollment. So just wanted to highlight that. And next slide, other grants that you will receive, the board will receive this year. Learning Improvement Fund for support staff, so that's continuing, slightly up from the previous year. That supports additional education assistant time weekly. So currently it supports another hour a week for education assistants to have meetings with teachers and collaborate. And that fund continues. We work with QP to determine how that is allocated. It also supports education assistance time at Coheman and Alexander. Community Link is up again really slightly. I think it's $636,000 versus $642,000. That's in place for the same purposes as last year. Annual facilities grant is up about $50,000 from the previous year, so that's a little bit more significant of a hike. It's about 3%. That supports upkeep of buildings, painting, roofing, window replacement projects, couch and secondary that you see still going on as well. So those funds are coming in again. They've been announced. And then the next slide is the last of the funds. Pay equity continues, $363,000. That has been a fixed amount in place for 18, 19 years now. Hasn't changed at all. I think that's probably one of the items that will be reviewed through the funding formula review, whether it's appropriate to leave that as a grant outside of the operating funds. And the Student Transportation Fund continues. That's to offset charging fees to students that live within their catchment areas. Boards can still charge fees for out-of-catchment schools of choice and international student riders. We do charge for international student riders as part of their tuition package. So what's going to happen? We'll bring an updated surplus projection to the board on April 3rd. That'll be the most significant balancing item that the board will have, is to look at this year's surplus beyond what is to be kept in contingency. We'll have that figure by next week. The survey, which we'll look at after this, will go out on March 29th. The district will start to commence meetings with community and partners on April 5th. Options to reduce the shortfall will be presented over a series of meetings, and they will end on April 24th, where the board, this committee will make a recommendation to the board for adoption of a budget. So the budget will be balanced by October 24th. October 25th, first and second reading of the budget. Oh, I'm sorry, April 25th. Reading the old. First and second reading of the budget will occur, and then on the May 1st, the final reading, and then it's into staff. Yeah, it's tight. It's another tight period time frame. Lot to do. So this is what we have now. I think the real takeaway is that the budget is not balanced yet, but the hope is that there'll be some significant surplus that will be able to help with that. And then we'll look at the wish list items along with that. So the next presentations will bring more details.
Thank you, Mr. Sandquist. Any questions, Mr. Sandquist, at this time? Thank you. Mr. Trustee Thorne.
Just a comment, I really wish we had more time because we've got to meet with so many people to look at the monies that we've got versus the money that's needed in various things. It's one of the budget years, probably the most frustrating time. It's so limited. We've only got a little door, and I really wish we could find a way to make some changes where we can really go over things instead of. Sometimes I feel like we can be too hasty, and it's a be careful what you wish for kind of thing. It really has me concerned that there's going to be so many people saying this is what we would like to have, and though we agree, we may have to say no. So I don't know. That's my only comment is that I don't like the short time that we have to play with budget when it affects so many students, teachers, and everyone else. You name it, affects everybody.
Moving on to 7B, budget survey.
Yeah, I think Katie's been at work revamping our previous year's survey. So in some ways it's similar, in other ways it isn't. It's here before you for comment. We can kind of walk through it together because we'll go out at the end of this week, or is it next week? Or the date, 29th? This week. We'll go on Thursday. So we start out with a little bit of education about the budget, talk about some facts about the district, talk about how the funding is allocated now. We have used some language out of last year's budget, which is around instructional programs. So the first part is really educating what is in the budget. So what are the types of things that the board have at their discretion, talk about classroom instruction, student supports, instructional supplies, talk about district administration, what is operations and maintenance. We're going to put some fun facts in there. How many facilities are there? How many square feet is that? So I think it's approximately 1 million square feet a day that are cleaned in the school district by our custodians. So we'll have some of those facts in there. How many students are transported by our transportation? How many kilometers a day is that? Some interesting things. And then move into where our funding comes from, which is basically that slide that we just looked at. Then on to the questions. Who are you? So we want to find out who's filling out the survey. Some of the items that we've had in I guess kind of on the wish list or things to be considering or things that are going to be asked about in this survey. So early years is one of the topics that the survey looks to address. So, so we have a question around investing in the early year programs. Is that a valuable use of district funds?
So this is page 9 of your document. So my question, just in the preamble for early years, I was wondering if we could use language to do with ready to learn. We want to ensure all our children are arriving at kindergarten ready to learn. And I think this actually speaks too much of education readiness, but this is whole person readiness in terms of health and wellness. Trustee Spilsner?
Can I just add to the early years question? I'm just thinking as I read it that I think our strategic priorities say intervention programs. And so we don't want people to just say, oh yeah, more strong starts, more we got childcare facilities. it's not about that for us. Well, it could be a part of it, but another part of it is some sort of intervention for students who are not with those early learning skills already, and they fall so quickly behind.
Trustee Green?
As I'm looking at this, my question is, who's going to be reading this? Like, there's a lot of words.
Yeah.
A lot of reading, and I'm wondering, I don't know how you would make it less, but it seems to me that not everybody is going to want to take the time to read 8 pages, whatever number of pages this is. It's a lot of reading, and not everybody maybe has the reading level to read all.
We need to check the readability of this, but did we not have some preamble to each section last time?
We did, and we summarized it all into one big preamble rather than individual. We have actually made the survey shorter this year than it was last year.
Just one overall concern I have, and it's probably related to Trustee Thorne's comment. And the way that it is structured, it almost looks like we have a lot of extra money.
Yeah.
And where do we put it? Here's some considerations, and I'm not sure if there's a way to temper that somehow. But we may not have a whole lot of extra money to put anywhere. We may be looking for reductions. I mean, I hope not, but just a concern into that, building unrealistic expectations.
Trustee Smith?
First of all, just thinking about who's gonna be reading this, yes, we'll have staff reading this, but we're also gonna be having parents reading this in some of the language. I do not believe that parents are even gonna understand what they're reading, so that's first concern. And I'm only saying that because I know in years past, I've received calls just going, can you explain this to me, because I really don't understand what I'm reading. And I know we've been trying to simplify it over the years, but anyway, and then question 11.
Holy cow.
Yeah. Under programs of choice, I'm gonna reflect back to what Trustee Spilsbury just said. You know, like, we're not looking at all these different programs right now. We're focusing on Nature School. Can that question 11 just be focused on that one school? Because that might be a way for us to find out if there is big interest on that program, and we'll have that information back in April. So we'll be able to figure out quite quickly through this survey. I mean, if everybody's talking about no, then there may be time for us to slam on the brakes and rethink it if we need to. And if there's huge interest on it, we may figure that out through the survey. If we just focus question 11 on Nature School.
Can we indulge Trustee Smith to discuss question 11 now ahead of all the other questions? No objections, okay. So,
Sorry, that's what I would do.
I actually had said, why not simply list these and check this, put a check mark beside it if they would like to, because you're asking them to put a written feedback in. You're saying just put in Nature School.
Yeah, so it says for an example, you know, learning-based French immersion technology, fine arts, international, blah, blah, blah. Why are we giving them all these choices? Why not just put the school district has an opportunity to create more programs for choice. I don't know how I would word it, but bring up the Nature School. I mean, we're putting out a press release. It's not a secret. So let's use this survey as a tool to find out if people are interested in that program.
But why wouldn't we want to know if they're interested in a fine arts program as well? Or-
Because that's not our focus right now. And wouldn't that, like, right now, we have an opportunity that this is gonna go to all the PATS, it's gonna pass a pile of parents. Why not take the opportunity and kill 2 birds with 1 stone and use the survey?
Thoughts on that, Justin? No thoughts. Trustee Dolan?
When I first looked at this, I'm going, well, why are we asking all these questions? But it would be good to know what people are thinking. We're not telling them what to think. If you say narrow it to nature-based,
Trustee Thorne?
I think we can add it, and you know, when I went over the survey, we've all gone over it and over it and over it. It kind of told me that we're asking everyone for their input so that we can better control our budget. And that was the whole idea of it. I hope we're not going to limit it to this is what the people have spoken, because it could be good, it could be bad, it could be detrimental to some of the existing programs. So it's something I'm very apprehensive. I like it, but I don't like it. If that makes any sense.
Trustee DeGroot?
I think I liked your idea of just putting them down, letting people put a check mark behind them. This is something I like, don't have to write anything out. And the next 3 questions, oh my goodness.
Hey, don't get ahead of things. I personally would like to just see them all listed and then a place for other. If there's something missing here that we should consider investing in or exploring in the future. Trustee Spilsbury?
Likely that's a good idea. If we're going out for input, we may as well get input on a lot of things. But I think the question perhaps needs to state that we are starting a nature program.
Potentially happening, yeah.
And perhaps there's a way to do that in that we focused on the nature program, but there are other opportunities to consider in the future or something like that. And how would you feel about that and make the list?
Staff got that down? Okay, we're on the bottom of page 9. And this is to do with student and employee wellness, and it follows up with questions 5 and 6. My concern is in the preamble, it doesn't explain what services we provide to support student and employee wellness. And then question 5 says, we want to invest in student wellness support investing in student wellness support across the school district is good use of district funds, but I think we have to be a little bit more specific. What are we investing in? Is this lunch programs, Nourish Couching? Is this daily physical activity? I don't know. I wouldn't know how to answer this question myself without some understanding of what that investment looks like. Question 5, question 6. How do we support our employees? Any thoughts about that? Okay, moving on to question 7. Sorry.
Before you go, there's just one thing in question 7 there. Should the board consider investing in to support student or employee wellness? Just or employee wellness. Just making them separate because they're 2 different groups.
Oh, so it's additional resources and program and or programs. And or support, sorry. Okay, moving on to communications. Is Katie doing a good job, should we say?
Yeah.
Any questions on those? I didn't have any questions. Moving on to 10. Dealt with programs of choice. Moving on to 12, 13, and 14. Trustee DeGroot. You had something on this one? You were.
I mean, oh my goodness, yes.
Yeah, but I didn't know whether that was a good thing or a bad thing.
It was a bad thing. Are there any other program services the board should consider? Please frame your answer in the context of what will support. Again, I'm questioning who are we asking this question of? It's not. Tanessa. That actually all 3 of them.
So are you suggesting we deep six them, or we actually provide some examples?
Yes.
Deep six them?
I think so. I think we've asked all these other questions, and I don't know that in the context of what will support student success in our school district, that's an essay.
these are kind of, sorry. These are sort of the, what do you think, are the things that we haven't covered, what do you think? Like, did you have any other suggestions that should be in this budget, because we don't have everything necessarily on the list ahead of that.
Trustees Smith and trustee Paulson.
I think you've hit the nail right on the head, is maybe it just needs to be the one question. The big catch-all question, is there anything we missed? And I think that's where question 14 goes. Is there anything you believe the board needs to know or consider during the development of the budget? You know, I think really that's just the one question that needs to exist and have an experience. So if anybody feels the need to go for it, then they have that opportunity right there. But I think the other two questions are
Redundant, if you have that at the end.
correct.
Actually, I like question 13, just because, you know, what are the top priorities? Like, there's so much in the budget. But what would you see are priorities we believe should be focused on in the budget? So, I don't know if there's a way to, like, for me, it's two different things. It's what is the priorities, and then what else can you tell us that you want to? There's a counter argument over here.
Trustee Smith.
It's not an argument, however, if you look at it from an outside perspective of not an employee, but my neighbor or people in the community, which we're also wanting to, how do they know, like, unless they've gone through our budget priorities document or understand what some of this stuff is, like how can they say what the priorities would be? Well, educate the kids and give them what they need is what we're gonna hear. Right, so that question to me, unless you're gonna give a huge background on what our priorities are, you're gonna attach our strategic plan and this is where we're going, this is how we're getting there, then this question's hard for everybody that's not with School District 79.
Trustee Thorne.
I like the questions, but I was hoping we could change a little of the wording, because one of the things that really bothered me this year, we've had incidents in the schools, it is more safety, and I guess it would go all the way back even to communication, having parents have a direct line to who they call for an incident that could be happening at a school rather than have their kids give away their locations by texting each other. Safety. I'm really worried about the safety of our students. We need to come up with, in the budget, we should come up with some kind of plan where we can better protect them. You know, you look at what happened at Cow High. Students were outside the school. Everybody was on lockdown inside. Parents were trying to get a hold of the kids, understandable. But there should be one direct place that they would focus on so that the kids remain safe. Who does what, when, kind of thing. Safety. I think that's what's missing in there. And I have a son who goes to Cow High, so I was very concerned even though I was on site. Even the teachers, there's a lot of things that we have to teach them. They have to teach us. The kids have to teach their parents. The parents have to teach their kids, kind of. We need to work out something, and that should be one of the priorities in the budget is safety, communication.
So you're gonna answer the survey with that?
Yeah.
Good. Okay, can we agree to get rid of 12, because 13 is redundant to 12. In your opinion, are there any other program services? And it says, well, of the top 3. So if they're answering 12, would they not repeat themselves in 13?
Can we just use 14?
Except we don't use priorities. This could be a safety issue, right?
Or could we not just combine it? You know, is there anything else you believe the board needs to know or consider during the development of the budget process? Please prioritize.
Nice.
Thank you.
Okay, so request staff to reduce these to something like Trustee Smith just summarized. End of survey message. Thank you for completing this. Your feedback is valuable and will be shared with the Board of Education later. Okay, moving on to policy, identification bylaw. So we've never had this before. So we were out in a limb until this passed. No, I didn't know it. So, Trustee Smith, you want to do something with this? Recommend
I
to the board.
believe that probably, if anybody has anything to say about it, the secretary treasurer would.
Sure. We don't have one, and it was identified through the policy review with Mr. Sloan, and his recommendation was that we put one in place before the board, really immediately before the board actually addresses the entire package. And he presented us with this copy of a indemnification bylaw, which we have reviewed and brought forward to PDBC to either recommend adoption to the board, which would then be read through the typical bylaw reading process, or if you needed more time to send it out or to advisory, you would have that option as well.
Trustee Smith.
I recommend. Put on to the board.
Seconded by Trustee Thorne. Any discussion on that? And are you referring that to advisory as well? Or is it to the board? Any discussion? Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Any other business? Motion to adjourn. Trustee Smith, Trustee Klug. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you, everyone.
Who's back on Facebook?